Okay, so welcome everyone. So good to be together again. Always a pleasure to learning together here at Drisha. This class is part of Drisha's Full Zman. Today's class is discussions on the Parashah, this week with Rabbi David Silber, which I think most of you know. Today's Parashah Shiur is dedicated in honor of Tova. Oh, it looks like I have some feedback. Let me put someone on mute who needs to be on mute. Sandra, I'll put you on mute, okay? There you go. So today's Parashah Shiur is dedicated in honor of Tova Buloh's 93rd birthday. Happy birthday, Tova, from your Chavrutot, Sandra and Zella. So exciting. I hope you have a wonderful birthday, and what a perfect way to spend it with Rabbi Silber's class. And with that, I'll turn it to you, Rabbi Silber.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you. Congratulations, Tova. Okay, so Tova was a lifelong student at Drisha, a learner of Tova, and a good friend. Okay, so this week class is a class on the Parashah. Different people give the class. It's been my honor and privilege to give this week's class. So I wanted to talk about the Parashah and the Haftorah. So this week's Haftorah is extremely unusual. The last time we read this Haftorah was 23 years ago. And that is because this week's Parashah is Parashat Mikeitz. And as you all know, I'm sure, Parashat Mikeitz almost always falls on Hanukkah. Either Shabbat Hanukkah, sometimes it falls on the last day of Hanukkah. And when the Shabbos falls on Hanukkah, there's a special Haftorah for Hanukkah. Usually just one, but sometimes there are two Shabbatot. The first day of Hanukkah is Shabbos, and the two Haftorot. And then Mikeitz is always the last day of Hanukkah. But the last time we had a Parashat Mikeitz, which was not Hanukkah, was the year 2000. It's 23 years ago. So we really almost never read this Haftorah. But I did want to focus on the Haftorah and to discuss two things about the Haftorah. First of all, how the story of the Haftorah factors in, and I'll deal with this briefly, within the book in which it's embedded, which is the book of Melachim. And then secondly, of course, the connection between the Haftorah and the Parashah. So the Haftorah is taken from right at the beginning of the book of First Kings, Melachim Aleph, chapter 3. The Haftorah begins with verse number 15. Vayikat Shlomo v'hinei chalom. And when I say it's at the beginning of the book of Kings, I want to make a point about this. The first book of Kings, the first two chapters of Melachim, deal with the dying David, and David has not yet designated who is going to succeed him as king. So chapter 1 and chapter 2, both of those chapters are also Haftorah. It's interesting. And in those two chapters, Shlomo is actually made the king. His older brother Adoniah is parading around the city, proclaiming himself king, even as his father is still alive. But the prophet Nathan the prophet, and Bathsheba conspired to deal with this problem, to talk to David and to remind David that he had promised that Shlomo, Bathsheba and David's son, would be the next king. Whether he actually made that promise or not is not clear. But in any event, that's what happens. Shlomo is made the king, and in the second chapter, David instructs Shlomo how he is to behave in order to secure the kingship, which involves, among other things, killing two of the people that David had dealt with in his life and did not harm. One is his general Yoav, and the other is a fellow named Shimei ben Gera. So that's chapter 1 and 2. So in a sense, chapter 3 is the third chapter of the book, but in a certain sense, it's the beginning of the book because it's the first chapter that deals with the new king, which is Shlomo. Now, in this chapter, what happens is the chapter begins towards the very beginning. After Shlomo brings some sacrifices, Shlomo has a dream. In the dream, which is in chapter 3, before the Haftorah, in the dream, God speaks to Shlomo and says, "What do you want? Make a request, and I'll try to grant your request." So Shlomo, in the dream, famously asked God for wisdom. I need wisdom to judge your people. And God's response is that you ask very wisely. You have some wisdom already. You asked very wisely, and I'm going to give you wisdom. And if you behave yourself, I'll give you the other things as well. I'll give you wealth, I'll give you longevity, etc. Now, whether he behaves himself is a question for the Book of Kings, but in any event, he has wisdom. God says, I will grant you wisdom. And the story then picks up in chapter 3, verse number 15. It's the story that all of you know. Without exception, I'm quite sure it's a very famous story. But I did want to talk briefly about the story itself and then try to connect it to the Parashah. This is the Haftorah for Mikeitz. It says, Vayikat Shlomo v'hinei chalom. Shlomo wakes up, and behold, he had a dream. It's exactly the way that the Torah describes Paro, actually, in Parashat Mikeitz. Vayikatz Paro v'hinei chalom. He had two dreams or one dream, but we have that expression. He wakes up in the middle, then he wakes up at the end. Vayikatz Paro v'hinei chalom, and the Haftorah starts with Vayikat Shlomo v'hinei chalom. So he recognizes God has, in the dream, God grants him wisdom. Shlomo brings some sacrifices, and then we have the story. The story is known to all of us. The story is this. It begins in verse number 16. Oz tavona shtayim noshim zonot el hamelech v'tamoda lefanav. So two prostitutes come to the king, and they stood before him. And what they say is the following. So one of the women says that me and the other woman live together in the house. There's nobody else with us in the house. We're the only two people in the house. And she says that we both have a child. We both have a child. I gave birth to a child. She gave birth to a child. And shortly after I gave birth, the other woman accidentally killed her own child. She lay upon the child, she says, in verse number 19, and the child died. At which point, the other prostitute took her dead child and placed that child with me. And she took my living child and she took that child for herself. And when I got up in the morning to nurse the baby, I saw it wasn't my child. She had taken my child, she had switched it. But the other woman says, no, in verse 22, no. No, mine's the living child. Yours is the dead child. But the first one said, no. Your child is the dead one, and mine is the living one. And they speak before the king. So the king here, and this is actually quite rare, even though the book of Shmuel said that one of the king's jobs is to judge. We don't really find, if at all, encounter the king actually making a judgment in this sense. This is actually a judgment. He has his court. The two litigants come before him, and now he has to decide the case. So, of course, Shlomo famously says, this one says that, this one says that. Shlomo says, give me a sword. And the king says, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll cut the child in half. Give half to one and give half to the other. Fine. I was thinking that actually the situation that the Book of Kings describes is one that we're quite familiar with, and one that is central to the Mishnah and to the Gemara, because it's the first Mishnah in Bav Mitzvah. Shnayim ochsin b'talit. In the case of the Mishnah, two people come in holding on to an object, holding on to a garment. Zeh omer kuleh sheli, and one of them says, "This is mine." The Zeh omer kuleh sheli, and the other one says, "It's mine." So the Mishnah says, "Yachoku," and you divide the garments. In other words, what preoccupies the Mishnah and much of the Talmud, which deals with torts and laws, etc., is a very important question. How do you determine a case in a situation where there's no evidence? Such as in the case, in the story over here with the two women. There's nobody else in the house. All we have are the claims. We have no external proof. And that's something which preoccupies the Gemara, and especially, by the way, preoccupied the medieval commentaries on the Talmud called the Tosfot. They were very interested in this, and they developed an incredible approach to try to make a determination about how you figure out who was right and who was wrong based on the claims alone, without evidence. There's a concept in the Gemara, which I'm not going to get into now, obviously, called migu. Migu means, let's say you could advance a winning claim. You have some kind of winning claim. But you don't make that claim. You make a different claim. Then the Gemara says that since you could have made a better claim, we believe you on the lesser claim. Because if you were going to lie, you could lie with a better claim. The Tosfos took this idea of a migu and develops it in 100 different ways. It's quite amazing, actually. But that is one of the issues in the Talmud, how to figure out how to make a legal determination when you have no proof. And the first mission in Bava Metzia says, Yachoku, you divide the garment in half. Give each one half. That's what Shlomo says here. Yachoku. You say the baby's yours. You say the baby's yours. There's no evidence. Okay, so let's divide it. You must have known the mission in Bava Metzia. Yachoku. So, of course, as we know, one woman says, that sounds reasonable. Sounds like a fair judgment. Half and half. We'll split it. And the other woman says, no. The real mother says, listen, forget it. I withdraw my case. Let the other one have it. So Shlomo says the true mother is the one who says, let the other one have it. And Shlomo decides the case in her favor. Someone pointed out many years ago, and it's a very important point, that this rule only works if you actually believe he's going to cut the baby in half. That's actually a very important point. Is he really going to cut the baby in half? So the women apparently feel, the true mother feels certainly, this guy's going to do that. He's going to cut the baby in half. And that's an interesting insight into Shlomo, but that's not our subject today. In any event, this is the Haftarah. Now, before we get to the question, what is the connection between this and the Parashah? I wanted to make a different point about the story of Shlomo and his wisdom. And that is that the story of Shlomo and his wisdom, as I said before, is essentially the first story in the book. Because the first two chapters are about King David, the death of David, the transition of kingship from David to Shlomo, the getting rid of Shlomo's and David's perceived enemies. Okay, and now we begin the story of Shlomo, and this is the first story. And I wanted to make a very simple point about Sefer Melachim, which is this, that after the death of Shlomo, his son takes over. His son's name is Rechavam. And when Rechavam becomes the king, the people approach Rechavam later in the book of Kings, and they say to Rechavam, listen, your father was very difficult. He was a real taskmaster, which is certainly the case. Shlomo conscripts all kinds of people to build his house for 13 years, to build the temple. It's forced labor, actually. So Shlomo was a terrible taskmaster. That's what the people say to his son Rechavam. So why don't you go easy? Go easy on us. So Rechavam says, give me some time, I'll come back to you. So he consults his advisors. He has young people and he has older people. The older ones tell him, give in to the people. And this way they'll befriend you. And later on, you can do all kinds of things, but you establish a good relationship with the people. That's what the older ones tell him. The young Turks, the younger ones say, what are you talking about? Tell them, you think my father was tough? You'll see tough. So he goes back to them, and that's what he says. My father was nothing. He was easy. I'm going to beat you, he says. I'm going to really be tough. So the people say, oh, really? That's very interesting. But be tough to somebody else, because we're checking out of here. And 10 of the 12 tribes establish a separate kingdom. That is one of the themes of the book. Sefer Melachim is really about somebody sitting in exile and asking one simple question. How did we get into this mess in the first place? How do we end up with not with one people, but with two people, with a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom? And the book traces back from the beginning, it traces the history of the Jewish people. But someone is sitting in a place of exile. Now, Abraham Lincoln said famously, a nation divided against itself cannot stand. Once you split the nation in two, can't survive. It takes time. But the thesis of the book is that a divided nation cannot survive. So you have the divided nation. Eventually, the 10 tribes are exiled first. Then, of course, the temple is destroyed, and Judah, the kingdom of David, also goes into exile. And the point I want to make about the book, and there's more to be said about this, is that what the book is making a very simple point in the beginning of Sefer Melachim. What Shlomo was able to do is to keep the baby in one piece. Keeps the baby in one piece. Everybody understands. If you cut the baby in half, the baby can't live. That we understand. But Shlomo was able to keep the baby in one piece. But his son, Rechavam, the moment Shlomo dies, the kingdom is divided. And when you read the story about Shlomo and his son Rechavam, I think we ask ourselves the question, is it that Shlomo is so smart? He asks for wisdom. And there's a certain kind of wisdom which understands how to bring people together. But is it the unusual wisdom of Shlomo, Chochmat Shlomo, the wisest man who ever lived? Is that what's required? In other words, fundamentally, people cannot be kept together. The default is that people with different views go their different paths. And it requires a particularly astute person to keep them together. It's one way to read the story. And the other way to read it is, he is very bright, he's very smart, he's also a youngster, but he has the wisdom, he knows how to keep them together. But his son in particular is a complete idiot. So the idiot son is the one who takes bad advice, takes advice from the young people, as opposed to the elders. From the standpoint of this book, that's a big mistake. And therefore, the kingdom is divided. So is it Shlomo's wisdom and brilliance? It's one way to read it, and that's sort of a frightening thought. Or is it quite the opposite, that he can't be stupid? His son is a fool, and that causes the division. And once the nation is divided into two, it will eventually go into exile, because a divided child can't live. I would add to this point, and I'll stop and take any comments or questions, that in the book of Melachim, there are other places in the book where the child is used, I believe, as a kind of metaphor for the people. I'll mention two places without getting into the specifics in any detail, and there's also another case. What I'm referring to is that in the book of Kings, to which the story of Shlomo is a kind of preamble, what makes the book of Kings an interesting story, actually, and without this piece of it, it wouldn't be that great a book. It would read like the book of Chronicles, not the most exciting book in the world. But what makes Sefer Melachim a very good book are two characters who figure prominently in the middle of the book: a person and his protege. The person is Eliyahu Hanavi. There are stories about Eliyahu, fascinating stories about Eliyahu, and then also fascinating stories about his protege named Elisha. So Eliyahu and Elisha, and Eliyahu is, we are confronted with Eliyahu after the city of Jericho is rebuilt in chapter 16. So the conquest is being undone. Achav is the king. These are wicked people. And both in the story of Eliyahu and Elisha, there's a story about them encountering a woman who has a child, and the child dies. Both in the case of Eliyahu in this chapter 17 of this book, in the case of Elisha, the Shunammite woman, in the 4th chapter of Melachim Bet, also a Haftarah. And what they're able to do, because the death of the child in this book is a metaphor for the death of the nation. We're about to go into exile. Achav is the king, Jericho is being rebuilt. But what Eliyahu and Elisha both do separately in their stories, they resurrect the child. They bring the child back to life. And that's a very appropriate metaphor, because at that point, Israel should go into exile. They've undone the conquest. They rebuild Jericho. Idolatry pervades. But somehow the two prophets, Eliyahu and Elisha, can resurrect the child. But once Elisha's gone, then you're on a very bad path, which ends up, of course, in the double exile. So that's the point of the Haftorah within the context of Sefer Melachim. I think that's a very important point, actually. And now I want to get to the other question about what is the connection between the Haftorah and Parashat Mikeitz. But before that, I'll stop and take any comments or questions if there are any.
Rabbi Silber, Rechavam becomes the head of the 10 tribes or the one tribe, Yehuda? Rechavam.
2 tribes. There's Yehuda plus Binyamin.
Right, and then Yeravam later makes Rechavam seem like a something of a good tzaddik during the reign.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but right. Yeravam and Nevat takes over the 10 tribes.
Right.
And Rechavam is left with only 2 tribes.
Right.
And there was almost a civil war. There's no civil war. The prophet says, don't fight it. And yes, so with Yeravam ben Nevat is the first king of Israel. It's called Israel, or the northern kingdom. In the later prophets, it's called Ephraim. But that's the northern kingdom. That's 10 tribes. Those are the 10 tribes that go into exile first in the book of Kings. And later on, of course, the temple is destroyed, and the other 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, go separately into exile. Yes, anybody else for comments or questions? Okay, if not, I will continue. Now let's get to the main question, which is the relationship between the Haftorah and the Parashah. Before I get to what I think is the main point, I want to make a different point, which is when I say, what is the relationship between the Parashah and the Haftorah? Typically, or any 2 texts that are related to each other, when you look at the 2 texts, it's not that there's only one connection. There may be multiple connections, many connections, but typically there's one main connection, at least the main one we're going to focus on. So, for example, over here, this is the Haftorah for Mikeitz. The main character of Mikeitz, of course, is none other than Yosef. Well, one of the things we know about Yosef in Parashas Mikeitz, Joseph is an interpreter of dreams, and he's summoned by Paro to interpret Paro's dreams. And Joseph says in the Parashah, if you remember, after he interprets Paro's dreams, he says to him, later on, towards the middle of the chapter 41, he explains Paro's dreams. After he explains the dreams, it's much further down. Keep going. After he explains the dreams, it's another 20 verses. Keep going. Keep going. Go more. One sec. Hold on. No, you passed it already. Chapter 41. Go back. Go back. Go back a little more. One more verse. No, wait, go back some more. One more verse. No more verse. One more verse. That's it. Verse 33. After Joseph interprets Paro's dreams, he says to Paro in verse number 33, Pharaoh should appoint, find someone who is a person, Navon v'chacham, discerning and wise, whom you can set over the land of Egypt. You got to find somebody who's very smart, who can help you out after I've interpreted the dreams. And if he tells Paro what to do, and Paro says, listen, since God speaks to you, who's wiser than Joseph? Now, the point is, Joseph's an interpreter of dreams. And what he says to Paro, who has dreams, that the 7 cows and the 7 sheaves in the beginning of the parasha represent 7 years. There are 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And those are Paro's dreams. And you have to prepare for the 7 years of famine. So during the years of plenty, says Joseph, this is what you got to do. Gather all the food, place it under your control, so that in the years of famine, you will have food to feed the people. That's what Joseph says. But someone's got to oversee all this. A very wise person has to oversee it, in which case Paro says to Joseph, who is wiser than you? So the 2 things. First of all, what stands out in Paro's description of Joseph is Joseph's wisdom. Since God has told you, Hodia, you have the knowledge, you are a Navon, and you are a Chacham. Chachma, Bina, and Dat. Those 3 are descriptions of Joseph. And of course, the wisest of all is Shlomo. So right there's a parallel between the wisdom of Solomon, as evinced in the Haftorah, and the wisdom of Shlomo. Not only that, the wisdom of Shlomo's, the knowledge that Shlomo will have knowledge, the knowledge that God grants Shlomo knowledge, comes to Shlomo in a dream. So Shlomo also was a dreamer. In the first line of the Haftorah, Vayikat Shlomo v'hinei chalom. So right there we have 2 connections, obvious connections to the parsha. But there's a much deeper connection, which I'll get to in a moment. I just want to make a different point, since I cited this verse about Joseph's wisdom. And Joseph says to Paro, you should appoint a very wise person and place him over the land of Egypt. To which Paro is going to say, a few verses later, who's wiser than Joseph? I appoint you. Now the question is, when Joseph gives Paro this advice, find a wise person and appoint him over the land of Egypt, it does seem a bit presumptuous, doesn't it? That this fellow, who just a few hours ago was a slave in Potiphar's prison, is now telling the Pharaoh what to do, whom to appoint. Not to speak of the fact that it seems somewhat self-serving, but leaving all that out. What do you mean? You're telling me what to do? It sounds like it's chutzpah, really, that Joseph would give Pharaoh advice, unsought for advice. Yes, interpreting the dreams, that's his job. But what I do about it, that's not his job. But I wanted to make a point about what Joseph says, which is, could be right, it could be wrong. I don't know myself, but it's an interesting idea, which is this. In the beginning of this week's parasha, Pharaoh has 2 dreams. He has one dream about the cows, very beginning. The 7 healthy cows, the 7 lean cows, and the lean ones devour the healthy cows. And then it says Pharaoh wakes up. He woke up. Vayishan. He goes back to sleep and he has another dream. There it is, right there, that verse. The next verse, right? Next verse, verse 5. Yeah. Vayishan vayachalom shenit. He had a second dream. And this is about the sheaves or the stalks, the healthy stalks, the unhealthy stalks, etc. He wakes up again. He tells his dream to his magicians and to his wise men. And it says, V'yein poter otam lefaro. You find that verse. That's verse number. Yeah, it is right there. Verse number 8. Per tells that he calls the wise men the magicians, and Pharaoh told them his dream and chalomo. V'yein poter otam lefaro. But none could interpret them for Pharaoh. And that verse is very interesting because it contains a kind of contradiction. There's an internal contradiction in verse number 8, because it says that Pharaoh told them et chalomo, his dream, singular. V'yein poter otam lefaro, but none could interpret them, plural, to Pharaoh. So the question is it one dream or is it 2 dreams? That's actually a very interesting question. When we studied Bereshit, she just finished recently, I talked about that. Is it 1 dream or 2? But in this chapter, what Joseph says to Paro, this is found in chapter 41. Joseph says to Paro, let's see. verse number 20, 22 or 23. I can't read this. I think it's 23. You have it, verse 23. You just had it. You took it off the screen.
Yeah, I'll put it back on the screen in just a sec. Verse 23?
I think it's 23. No, it's not 23. I can't see it. It's probably 25.
Okay.
That's it. Vayom Yosef el Paro, Chalom Paro echadu. Says Joseph to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one. It's one dream, not two. So the question is, says Joseph, if it's one dream, it's the same dream. Healthy, 7 good years, 7 bad years, etc. It's all one dream. Then Joseph asked the question a couple of verses later. He says, Chalom echadu, in verse 26, it's one dream. If it's one dream, so why do you have 2 dreams if it's all one, right? Why do you have, right? So it's all the same thing, Chalom echadu. So Joseph asked the question, so if so, why is it repeated? That's in verse number 32. He answers his own question. Why is it repeated? Why the repetition of the dream if it's one? Because the matter is nachon. It's been determined by God, and God will hasten to do it. In other words, Yosef says to Paro, I'll tell you why the dream is twice. Because God wants to make sure you're getting the message. The message has got to go through. You know why? You asked me when do the years of plenty begin? They begin in exactly 60 seconds. And therefore, and now you can't wait, Paro. You've got to find somebody immediately. My point is, Paro is part of the interpretation. It's not someone just giving you a piece of advice. He's saying, you asked me to interpret your dreams. Here's what I'm telling you. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And the 7 years of plenty start today. Immediately. That's God. That's why it's repeated. It's an urgent message. Act immediately to solve this problem. Don't wait. Therefore, you got to find someone right away. That's what he says. Of course, he may be thinking about himself. Wouldn't surprise us. But Paro understands that Joseph is the most appropriate. Anyway, so we have dreams. We have the dreams over here, and we have the wisdom of Joseph, etc. But there is a deeper point. And you have to remember that Parashah Mikeitz is part of the Joseph story. The Joseph story is about the last 30% of the book, beginning in last week's Torah reading in chapter 37. And it's one narrative, and it feels different from the rest of Genesis. It reads like a novel. It's totally different. There's much more elaboration of character, insight into character, much more complicated plot. Deals with a lot of different actors over here. There's the father, there's the children in general, there's Joseph, and the relationships between each, which is 2-directional. There's Jacob and his sons, there's the sons in Jacob. There's Joseph and the brothers in Joseph. So they're all connected. There's Joseph and his father, there's the father to Joseph. All kinds of very complicated relationships. So it's all one big narrative. And the narrative began last week in the first few words of Parashat Vayeshev, which is Vayeshev Yaakov v'Eretz B'gurei Aviv. Jacob dwelt in the land of his fathers, in the land of Canaan. Eila Toldot Yaakov Yosef Hayah. This is the story of Jacob, and it starts with Joseph. That is to say, that the story of Joseph and the brothers must be understood in terms of Jacob. Because Joseph is not the only dreamer in this book. There's another dreamer, and his name is Yaakov. Yaakov is also a dreamer. Yaakov dreams 2 dreams. When he first runs away from home, he has a dream. He sees the angels ascending and descending a staircase to heaven. Sulam mutzav arza, v'roshom magia hashamayma. And Jacob, when he wakes up from this dream, in which God speaks to Jacob, God says to Yaakov, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to bring you back in peace. I'm not going to abandon you. That's the first dream. That's his dream. And when Jacob wakes up from that first dream, He's very frightened. And he takes the rock that he had been sleeping on, and he sets it up as a pillow, and he pours oil upon it. And he names the place where he was sleeping Beit El, the house of God. And Yaakov says he takes a vow at the end of chapter 28. Says, God, if you be with me, if you protect me, if you bring me back, give me food to eat and clothing to wear, bring me back in peace. B'shavti b'shalom beit David, bring me back to my father's house. You will be my God. And this rock that I set up shall become the house of God. Know that you give me, I will tithe. That's what Yaakov says. So the key word in Jacob's vow, probably the key word in the story, is the word bayit. Jacob promises to build the bayit. If you take care of me, you'll be my God. And what Jacob means by that is not, listen, if you feed me and whatever, you're my God. If you can't feed me, what do I need you for? That's not what Jacob is saying. It's not what he's saying at all. You are my God. You're the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. So the God of Jacob. My father and grandfather. I'm in that tradition. But if you take care of me and you bring me back, you'll be my God in addition, which is my relationship, which is different than the others, different than Abraham, different than Isaac. Because neither Abraham nor Isaac can build the house. By the house, we mean the family. We mean a structure in which everybody is included. Avram couldn't do that because the covenant with Avram is only with Yitzchak, not with Ishmael. And the covenant of Yitzchak gets from his father. He passes on to Yaakov, not to Esau. But Yaakov makes a different point. If you help me return in peace, then I will build the bayit. And when Jacob speaks about the bayit, he doesn't mean his physical house. He means his family. He calls his family his bayit. In fact, it's the first verse in the book of Shemot. Shemot b'nei Yaakov abayim Mitzrayim ha'it Yaakov ishu beito ba'u. Each one came with his bayit. So the bayit is an incredibly important word which has multiple meanings. But when Yaakov talks about his bayit, he means his family. It's interesting, by the way, it's now Hanukkah, of course. And the mitzvah of Hanukkah, the Gemara says, ner ish ubeito. The minimum is one light for the bayit. And the later authorities, halachic authorities, debate, what does it mean, ishu beito? Does it mean the house? That's an obligation on the house? Or does it mean something else? Bayit is not the house. The bayit is the household. Members of the family. That is to say, one light for a family. Or anybody that's part of the family. So it's not about the house. What if you're not in a house, actually? What if you're traveling? It's an old question. Do you light Hanukkah candles if you're traveling or not? If it's on the bayit, you're not in the bayit. Of course, if someone is in your bayit and lighting, that's good enough. You're part of that family. Or does it mean household? So everybody's obligated. Primarily, when you light inside your house. But if you're traveling, maybe you light without a house. That's the question, actually, about the Hanukkah candles. But my point is the word bayit. So Jacob wakes up and Jacob takes a vow. He takes a vow. The vow is, if you take care of me, I'm going to do something no one else ever did. I'm going to build a structure, a family, in which all of my sons are part of the blessing. It's never happened before. It's always been a process of selection. But Jacob takes a vow, I'm going to build a family where everybody is part of the family. At the end of the day, Jacob succeeds. Because at the very end of the book of Bereshit, when he blesses his sons, he gives them all a blessing. Now, some of these blessings sound more like critiques than blessings, but they are blessings in the sense he doesn't eliminate anybody. He includes everybody. Everybody is included. As the Torah said towards the end of this book, these are the 12 sons of Jacob. Ish kibirchato beirachotam. He blessed each one according to the appropriate blessing. So Jacob, at the end of the day, succeeds. He fulfills his vow. But fulfilling the vow is not a simple matter. Because to fulfill the vow, everybody's got to be included. But there's one son in particular that the brothers have a difficulty including. Not only, I would say, have a difficulty including, they actually attempt to murder him. And that's the story of Joseph. The brothers conspire to kill Joseph. And then they have some second thoughts about it, perhaps. And maybe they're thinking about selling him. It's not clear whether they sold him themselves, or someone came by in the interim. But in any event, certainly the relation of Joseph to his brothers is extremely fraught and extremely fragile at best. And whom can we blame? Well, everybody gets blamed because Jacob gives him a special coat. After he brings back evil report, Yaakov gives him a ketonet pasim, either the multicolored coat or the coat goes all the way down to his hands, whatever pasim means. But the point is, he demonstrates his favoritism. One thing to love someone, but to demonstrate it creates problems. The brothers' behavior towards Joseph cannot be condoned. It's murder, attempted murder. And if they did sell him, selling your brother, it's a capital crime in the Torah. And Joseph, the first thing we know about him is he brings evil reports. It's a big crime in the Torah. And then he also tells them his dreams. And we wonder why it's necessary to tell them. Okay, your dreams is one thing. Keep it to yourself. There's no great moral message here to the brothers. It's not Isaiah the prophet telling the people to repent. He's telling you, I had a dream last night. You want to hear it? Not really. I'll tell you anyway. 11 stars, the sun, moon bow down to me. How do you like such a person? It's hard to warm up to that kind of guy, especially when you're one of the stars, 11 stars. So the point is, the family is in the process of unraveling. It started before Joseph. It starts with Shimon and Levi. It starts with Reuben sleeping with Bilhah. It starts the way the family was built in the first place. The competition between the wives starts in exile. It starts with Lavan. But here's the point. But Jacob is part of the problem. Jacob, who favors Joseph, right? In last week's Parashah, is the same Jacob who said to his sons about this Dinah thing, what did you do? You could have gotten me in big trouble. We all could have gotten killed. And they say, what are you talking about? This is our sister. What do you mean? What do you mean we shouldn't do anything? So the division, the disagreements are very deep. And here's the point.
Rabbi Silber, then Yaakov Vayigar, he maintains that period of time, not seeing all the trials and tribulations of his son, but it's the fusion of Yosef with them that makes him aware that he can start that bayit.
He does rebuke Joseph, that is true. But he still has a long way to go. Because it does say something else. Yes, he does rebuke. But then the Torah said, V'yaviv shamar et hadavar. Father kept it in mind, or as Rashi says, wants it to be true. If you want something to be true, you can't be a very good mediator. And when you want one of the two sides to be correct. So Yaakov is part of the problem. They're all part of the problem. And here's the point. It's a very simple point. It's a point of the Haftorah. The baby that's cut in half can't live. That's the point about Yosef is you need Yosef. You can't actually eliminate Yosef. He's a very central part of the family. And the question the Chumash is raising, actually, and Haftorah, of course, raises the question is, how do you keep the baby in one piece? How, in this case, can Joseph and the brothers somehow come together? And as I pointed out just a couple of minutes ago, it's a long story and a complicated one because you can't blame any one person. The Chumash has no interest in us blaming this one because it's not just this one's fault. It's a story of sale of Joseph is everybody's fault. It's Jacob's fault, obviously. It's Joseph's fault because he's a tattletale and a boaster. And the brothers, you can't condone the killing. And I'll say something else about the brothers, which is an important point. It's very hard to read these parashiot about division and not think about what's going on in our world, and has been going on for quite a long time. What's interesting about Joseph, if you remember last week's parasha, and it's all one story actually. Jacob sends Joseph to the brothers to make peace. That is true. Rosie said it's true. Yaakov wants to reconcile the brothers with Joseph. He says to Joseph, aren't your brothers in Shechem? Shechem is the story of Dinah. Shechem is the city of brotherly love. listen, let me send you to them, inquire of their welfare. The word shalom is very central. Yaakov wants to make peace. Yaakov sees the trouble. Yaakov rebukes Joseph. What is this? He says, this is not good. Go and we know it's dangerous. Joseph says hineni. Back in chapter 37. Hineni means hineni is always a sign of something very important is about to take place, maybe something dangerous too. And so he sends them there. But you remember in last week's Parashah that Joseph doesn't get there in time. By the time Yosef gets to Shechem, the brothers have left. Now, what happened? Why didn't Joseph get there on time? So the Torah says, if you recall, a mysterious man sees Joseph, and behold, Joseph is to'eh basodeh. He's lost. He got lost on the way there. And by the time he gets there, it's too late. Train has already departed. And this man sees Joseph lost, so he walks over to him. What are you looking for? I'm searching for my brothers. Joseph wants to make peace. He wants to make shalom. The problem is, Nasumi is that it's too late. Had Joseph met the brothers in Shechem, the Torah says, the city of brotherly love, fine. But by the time Joseph gets there, and is not getting there on time, is his own fault. Getting lost in the Chumash in Book of Bereshit is not about a bad sense of direction. Hagar gets lost in the desert. Joseph gets lost. To'eh. Abraham said about himself when he said, she really is my sister. And we always do this. Ever since we wander aimlessly, back in chapter 20. So he got lost. He didn't get there in time. And therefore, the man says it's too late. They went to Dotan, which probably means quarrel or dispute. So everybody's at fault. The brothers are at fault, Joseph's at fault, Jacob's at fault, which means that in order to make it right, in order to keep the baby in one piece, as it were, everybody has to figure out how they can be part of bringing people together. And as far as the brothers are concerned, Joseph had come to bring them peace. That's what the Chumash says. And the Chumash says about the brothers, you recall last week's Parashah, Vayiru oto merachok, uvetering dikrav alehem, vayinaku oto lahamito. The brothers saw him from a distance, and before he got there, they conspired to kill him. What's the Chumash saying over there? Saying something very simple. The brothers determine Joseph's fate before they hear what Joseph has to say. Oh, the dreamer is coming, let's kill him. Had they only waited, Joseph would have come and said, I came here to find out how you are, because we're very concerned about you. I'm concerned, our father's concerned about you. I come with words of peace, words of reconciliation. But the problem is that the brothers never get to hear that, because the second Joseph gets, they strip him of his coat and they throw him into a pit. And they want to kill him. Reuven says, don't kill him, let him die in the pit. But the fact is, the inability of the brothers to hear Joseph. And in fact, in this week's Parashah, in Mikeitz, when Joseph brings them down, when they're down in Egypt, and Joseph begins to accuse them, and one said to the other that we are guilty about our brother. Ashemim anachnu alachinu. Asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho b'tchano eleinu v'lo shamanu. We saw his terrible state, tzarat nafsho. When he cried out to us, when he pleaded with us, we paid him no heed. Therefore, this terrible thing is happening. It's interesting when the brothers talk to each other in Parashat Mikeitz, one says to the other, we're really guilty. All the bad stuff that's happening to us is because of the mistreatment of our brother. And what they single out is not we threw him in the pit. It's that when he cried out for help, we didn't listen. The Torah did not say in last week's Parashah that Joseph cries out at all. It doesn't mention it. But it mentions it in this week's Parashah. So the point is, I would say not waiting to hear what he has to say, and also not being receptive to the cries of someone who's in trouble. Those are two very grave sins. And it's not about sins. It's that unless you can actually hear the other person, you will never be able to actually live with the other person because you can't not even hear what they're saying. There are two sides, and each side doesn't hear the other side. If that happens, or you create a society in which people simply can't hear the other, that's a deep failure, and can never come together. But in Jacob's dream or commitment, his neder, his vow, will never be realized. Because you have to be able to hear what the other person is saying. How do you get through to the other person? And you have to be willing to hear the other person. So that's the Joseph story is a great story, but it's very complicated because it's not about, we always like to blame one side. But the truth of the matter is, in most situations, sometimes it's black and white. Most of the time, it's not black and white. Most of the time, there's not arguments on each side. There's things to think about in terms of each of the participants in the dispute. There's something to think about. In any event, so that's the story of Joseph, and that's the connection to the Haftorah. So in the remaining time that I have, about 10 minutes or so, let's pick up on at least one of the ways in which the problem is one of the pieces towards resolving the problem. And I'll mention one way, which is not in, of course, what you have in the story in this week's parasha already, and I mentioned this verse, you begin to have a feeling that the brothers regret what they did. The main focus is on the brothers, actually, in this parasha. All these bad things are happening to us because we didn't hear our brothers cry. We didn't hear. And it's that's certainly one of the foci of this week's parasha. But in terms of what I mentioned before about Yaakov, because at the end of the day, the one who took the vow, made the neder, Yaakov neder, it's Jacob. So Jacob has to figure out a way in which he can be part of the solution. In this week's parasha, he faces a great test, which is preliminary to solving the problem. Because if he doesn't pass this test, we'll never solve the problem. And what has to happen in this week's parasha is the brothers come back from Egypt. They bring back the food, but in the meanwhile, Joseph has taken one of the brothers as a hostage, as a captive. And that's Shimon. He takes Shimon as a hostage, and he says, if you come back and bring me your other brother, you claim to have another brother. If you bring me the other brother, Binyamin, then I will free Shimon, you will be fine, you'll get food, you'll be fine. But you got to bring Binyamin down, the younger brother down. Whatever Joseph's motive is, not our problem now. And the brothers come back, and he sends them all back with their food. They have bags of food. And they come back to their father. And they say, we had a tough time. The God spoke to us very harshly, whatever. And he took Shimon hostage. And they opened up their sacks of food. And lo and behold, in each of the sacks of food, they have their money. They have their money. So what is this? They have all kind of food. And they also have all their money and a missing brother, no less. So what might you think? Well, I don't know what you would think, because in a normal family, you wouldn't think this. Then maybe that missing brother was traded in for all the money. You might think such a thing. It's not a normal family. On the other hand, it is what the brothers wanted to do with Joseph, right? So now Jacob is faced with a problem. Send my Rachel's remaining son Binyamin down. When Joseph is missing, Shimon is missing. Now you want to take Binyamin, and Jacob is very suspicious. Yosef einenu v'Shimon einenu. And Jacob faces a test. On the other hand, they need the food. How can they survive without food? It'd be very difficult. What do you do? So what Joseph has done, for whatever reason, Jacob is faced with a test. Is he going to send Binyamin back with the brothers or not? Reuven speaks up. Reuven says, Father, if I don't bring him back, you can kill my two sons. And Jacob doesn't respond to that. He's not going down. Because, as Rashi points out, killing my grandchildren doesn't seem like a very good solution to my problem. So I'm not going to do this. That's Ruvain. It's a separate conversation. Meanwhile, there's a famine. There's no food. And then Judah speaks up. It's one of the great turning points of the story. Judah's speech. Send the boy with me. I take responsibility. Anochi erevenu abiti arev is the lesson that he learned from his Rebbe Tamar in chapter 38, about taking responsibility. True, it's a great moment. Judah steps forward as the great leader. But, and here's the big but, Jacob still has to accept it. Jacob still has to say, okay, which he does do. And it's very striking when he accepts Judah's offer. He doesn't say, I accept the offer and I'm sure you're going to succeed. That's not what he says. He says, I'm going to do it here. Take some money, pay the guy back. And then he says, El Rachamim, and may God have mercy on our souls. Right? And as far as I'm concerned, says Jacob, if I am bereft, I am bereft. Kasher shakolti shakolti. It's one of the great moments of the Joseph story. And the one who understood it's a great moment in the Joseph story, I don't know who wrote the book. Traditionally, they say someone wrote, but I'm talking, of course, about Megillah Esther. Because that moment where someone confronts me and says, you have to do this because it's the only way this family can survive, is exactly what Mordechai says to Esther in the great fourth chapter of the Megillah. You have to go and intervene on the behalf of the people. And Esther says to Mordechai, first she finally agrees. And you remember what she says. I will go, she says, fast for me, maybe pray for me, fast for me, I will fast. Kasher avadati avadati. If I fail, I fail. You could even read it as when I fail, I will fail. Jacob says, Kasher shakolti shakolti. So you do the right thing, not because you know you will succeed, but because it's the right thing to do. And Esther rises to the occasion. She says to Mordechai, I'm going to do it. But don't think that it's a done deal. Think nothing of the sort. I'm going to go in against the wall. I violate the law of the king. He hasn't seen me in 30 days. It's a chance we have to take, and I'm going to take that chance. That's in the Megillah. In the Chumash, which of course, the book of Esther is based on the Joseph story largely, it's Judah and Jacob, the two main characters who will bring this family together. Joseph will also factor in, and all the brothers. That's a different conversation. But this is this week's Parashah. This is one of the key moments. If he doesn't do that, we can never reconcile the family. So that's the necessary first step. Without that step, it never gets reconciled. But then there are other steps that Yaakov will take later. Yaakov has to figure out how to include Joseph. He's got to figure that out. And it's not a simple matter, because to the very end of this book, they don't really trust him. They still suspect him. Even after Joseph has been feeding them, caring for them for many years, they still believe when Jacob dies, he plans to kill them. And they go and make up a story. Our father said, don't do it. We'll be your slaves. And Joseph cries. So the point is, there always is that division between Joseph and the brothers. It's the division between the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes. It's the country split in half. And what the Chumash deals with, actually, and the Tanakh deals with, is you never eliminate the tensions. There's always tensions from day one. So Adam and Eve, from the moment that Eve gives them that fruit, they're 2 different people with 2 different aspirations, and there's always some suspicion. Some suspicion. How do we overcome it is the question. The Chumash makes the claim, I think it's a optimistic claim, that we can actually overcome it. We can find a way to talk it through and to find our common interests, to work together, and to live with the disagreements. But the disagreements should not get in the way of trying to figure out a way that different people can work together and can live together. In the case of Joseph and the brothers, it's not just they don't harm each other. That's Yishmael and Yitzchak. A cold peace is fine. When it comes to Joseph and the brothers, a cold peace is not good enough because we're all part of the same covenant. So it requires much more than a cold peace. Yaakov and Esav, there's a cold peace. He's Edom, we're in Canaan. Okay, fine. You don't have to love the other guy. When it comes to Joseph and the brothers, That's a very different story. So I'll have to stop at this point. What a story. It's amazing, actually. And the choice of Mikeitz is, the Haftorah for Mikeitz, of course, is very instructive. Happy birthday to Tova, many happy returns. And a faithful student of the Torah, and a boon to Drisha and a good friend. Happy birthday. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. Thank you.
Rabbi Silber?
Yes.
May I say one thing?
Even two things. Go ahead.
Even two things. Well, actually, I might have a second thing. So I was thinking, and I know you talked about this a lot, that one of the reasons that Anochi Ervenu Miadi Tavakshenu turns it around for Yaakov and resonates with him is because he himself says to Lavan, Anochi Achatena Miadi Tavakshena.
Yes, I did say that, and it's very true. The speech of what Yehuda says resonates with Yaakov's speech to Lavan about taking the personal responsibility. Anochi Achatena Miadi Tavakshena, right?
Even
That's
like
exactly.
Gnuvati Yom, Gnuvati Laila, Yosef just said, Ki Ganov, Gunavti Me'eretz.
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%. It's a very important point. That is true. And if we had more time, we could go into some more of the details of Yaakov's speech, in which and yes, of course, Yehuda picks up exactly on Yaakov's sense of, I would say, sense of responsibility for those in your care. That's what Yaakov was saying. You may be a crook, Lavan, but the things you entrusted me with, I took care of. And that's what Yehuda is saying to his father. If you put Binyamin in my care, I'm going to take care of those entrusted in my care. And that's what leadership is about. It's about really caring about the people that you're supposed to serve. It's very easy to get into politics over here, but I'll say one thing that I've said for many years about the PA, the Palestinians and all of that, their leadership is so faulty. I'm not looking for somebody who loves the Jews. I'm looking for somebody who actually loves the Palestinians. Their own leaders care about their own people.
No.
That's what's important.
I don't know.
You have to care about your own people and do what's best for them and not this other stuff. So that's what Yehuda understands, basically. That's what Yaakov understands. You gave me the sheep. The sheep are in my care. I'm going to take care of these sheep. Not because I love you, Lavan. You can't stand Lavan, actually. But because that's my job. And that's exactly what Yehuda picks. It's not just the language, of course, is all there, for sure. But it's the obligation to one entrusted to you, which Yehuda gets to the end, because at the end of the day says, take me instead of him, actually. I'm the Orev. That's what it means to be an Orev. Yeah, what else do you want to say, sorry?
No, this is just, and whoever needs to go can go, because this is just something that came around on one of the many WhatsApp groups we're all sharing, and you may have heard it, but someone wrote something called Kutonet Pasim. Did you see this, David? It says, B'ni chazar mehamaracha v'tzarmilo mitpaka mikol ma shelo ani arazti lo. Garbayim shetarma kihila me-Argentina. Smicha meshubetzet b'reach bayit acher. Magevet k'chula mi-mishpacha me-hamoshav. Tzitzit mi-Yerushalayim. Please matnat chevrat high-tech. Saif shesargak shisha gufiyot sheniknu mikutzat fibokus. Sadin shenatan lo chaver kfafot shekanu na'arot mi'il me'aron shel mishahu sheba ubikesh latet. Poreset et kol ha'arigim v'rokemet ketonet pasim chadasha. Re'eh Yosef arvu lecha achecha.
Right. Very good. Very good. Excellent, actually. And it's so there is that sense in Israel, and I'll stop with this, that there is a sense among most of the people, I would say, almost all of them, a kind of collective responsibility, which I think is, I mentioned to you, the yeshiva we have in Kfar Tzion, Drisha, the southern community was in Kfar Tzion. They were living in our dorms. They moved into our dorms. We have to get dorms now. We're moving to get to the dorms. It's another story. We're moving into new dorms, so hopefully got to pay for it. But we're moving into the new dorms in a few weeks. And the fact is, everybody pitches in. Everybody understands in times of crisis. The trick is to understand this thing without a crisis. That's the trick. Everybody understands at time of crisis, you got to pitch in. However, we don't forget it. Hopefully this will blow over at some point. Pray that it will. And we still understand what our collective responsibility is towards Joseph and towards, not because these are our brothers and sisters, even if we don't love them, but we're responsible for each other. I have to stop here at this point. Okay. Very good. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Silber, and thank you so much to everyone who participated today. Just a reminder that registration is open for winter's month classes. There's a special short program on organ donation from December 25th to December 27th, and also a continuation of Mishnah in depth on Ketubot with Rabbanit Leah Sarna. As always, to find out more information, you can go on 5784.drisha.org/winter. And again, thank you so much. Happy last night of Hanukkah, and I can't wait to see you next time. Lehitraot.
Okay.
Lehitraot.
Chag Sameach, Toda Rabba.
Chag Sameach.